Listen carefully because what you're about to uncover doesn't just extend the narrative, it tears it apart and rebuilds it into something far more dangerous. This is no longer just a confession sitting quietly on record. This is the breaking point, the exact moment where two completely different versions collide head-on, and suddenly nothing feels stable anymore. A case that many believed was closing in on its final chapter is now violently reopening in a way nobody predicted. And standing at the center of it all is Joe McCann. But now, the alleged focus of his words isn't turning inward, it's pointing somewhere else entirely. The timeline people relied on is beginning to distort. And within that distortion, something far darker is starting to emerge. In the beginning, everything appeared controlled. An arrest happened. The narrative tightened. People believed answers were finally within reach. But behind the scenes, something shifted. Something no one was prepared for. Because according to these emerging claims, he didn't just talk. He redirected the entire trajectory of the case. New allegations suggest he may not have been alone, with whispers surfacing about another figure, someone known, someone operating quietly behind the curtain. Investigators are now reportedly examining communication trails that hint at something deeper, something more deliberate. And if even a small part of that holds truth, then this was never a simple case to begin with. The emotional weight lands immediately, because this doesn't just reopen old wounds, it complicates them beyond recognition. A family that thought closure was finally within reach is now staring at a reality that feels even heavier. Look at the sequence closely. At first, everything moved fast. A suspect was named. A conclusion began forming. Then came the silence. And now, without warning, these new claims introduce an entirely new dimension. That kind of shift doesn't happen without pressure. Cases don't become more tangled after an arrest unless something forces that change. And that's where the tension begins to build. Was this always larger than one individual? Or is this a calculated attempt to shift blame? Were there hidden ties operating in the shadows the entire time? Because now pieces are surfacing that are too specific to ignore. Alleged private conversations. Quiet communication channels. A pattern investigators are now struggling to decode. And when all of it is viewed together, it doesn't feel accidental. It feels intentional. Take a step back, and the entire image transforms. This no longer resembles the actions of one person because if another name is even loosely connected, the weight shifts instantly to something far bigger. Systems are forced to react. Narratives begin to fracture, and the public starts asking questions that refuse to go away. One reaction online summed it up perfectly. If he wasn't alone, then the story we were given from the beginning was never complete. And now everything escalates. The scrutiny intensifies. The spotlight sharpens because this is no longer just about what happened, it's about who else might be involved. And that leads to the question that changes everything. Is this the truth finally surfacing in fragments? Or is this the moment the story spirals beyond control? What once seemed contained is now expanding beyond its limits. What once sounded like a single confession now echoes like something much more connected. A web no one saw coming. And at the center of this unraveling stands Joe McCann, whose alleged words are no longer bringing answers into focus. They're pushing everything deeper into doubt. It started with an arrest. For a brief moment, the narrative tightened. It felt clean, almost resolved. Like everything finally aligned. But just as quickly as that sense of clarity formed, it cracked, because according to circulating reports, he didn't simply recount what happened. He introduced something else. The possibility that another presence existed within the story. And then the tone shifts again, sharply, because what's being implied now isn't small. It's seismic. Alleged statements hinting he may not have acted alone. Quiet references to a recognizable figure lingering in the background, and communication patterns now being dissected for signs of coordination. If even a fragment of this holds weight, then the boundaries of this case don't just expand, they rupture. The emotional impact is immediate and overwhelming because this doesn't just reopen wounds, it drives them deeper. A family that believed answers were within reach is now facing something far more unstable. Look back at how it unfolded. In the beginning, everything moved fast. A direction appeared. A conclusion started to take shape. And then nothing. Silence. Until now, when these new claims emerge and shatter the structure we thought we understood. That kind of shift doesn't happen without cause. Cases don't evolve after an arrest unless something forces that movement. And that's where the theory begins to form. Was this always shared? Something larger than one person? Or is this a narrative being redirected under pressure? Because the second another name enters the frame, even indirectly, everything changes. The entire framework begins to bend under that weight. Now focus on the details being quietly circulated. Alleged private exchanges. Encrypted conversations. Patterns of contact investigators are now reportedly attempting to verify piece by piece. When those fragments are placed together, it stops feeling random. It begins to feel deliberate. The tone surrounding everything is no longer steady, it's shifting. This is no longer about one version of events. It's about multiple realities colliding at once. One reaction online captured it clearly. If his words are pointing beyond himself, then the story we were given was never complete. And now the scope widens again. Because if another connection exists, even at the edges, the questions don't stay contained. They spread. How much was known before this? What details slipped through unnoticed or were never pursued? That's where the pressure starts building. And you can feel it tightening. The emotional weight rises again because now every piece feels unresolved. Every answer feels partial. Nothing feels settled anymore. The situation intensifies, more attention, more speculation, more urgency for clarity. Because at this stage, it's no longer just about what happened. It's about whether the version we were given was ever whole to begin with. And that leads to the one question that refuses to disappear. Is this the truth finally revealing itself? Or is this the moment the story spirals beyond control? This is the point where everything shifts again, where it stops feeling like a sudden shock and starts resembling something that had been quietly forming beneath the surface the entire time. A case that once seemed contained is now pushing past a single explanation, expanding into something far more complex. And at the center of that shift stands Joe McCann, whose alleged words are no longer bringing clarity, they're deepening the uncertainty. The sequence feels familiar. An arrest happens. Attention surges. For a brief moment, it feels like control has been restored. But then everything tilts again because according to circulating reports, the focus is no longer just on the incident itself. It's on who else could be tied to it. Allegations suggesting he may not have been alone. Indirect references pointing to a known figure operating quietly out of sight. Communication trails are now being examined for signs of coordination. And if even a small piece of that connects, then this story no longer belongs to a single person. The emotional weight shifts instantly because now it's not just about answers, it's about how much may have been missing from a start. A family already carrying loss is now forced to confront something heavier. The possibility that the truth they were given was never whole. Look again at the timeline. At first, everything moved fast. A version of events was accepted. A direction locked into place. And then silence. A pause that once felt final, but now feels misleading. Because suddenly, new allegations surface and begin stretching this case in ways no one saw coming. That kind of reversal doesn't just raise questions, it builds pressure. When a case expands after an arrest, it usually signals something was missing, something overlooked or never revealed. And that's where the theory begins to solidify. Was there always another layer beneath everything? Or is this a shift happening under intense scrutiny? Because the moment additional connections, no matter how indirect, enter the conversation, the entire structure starts to bend. Now look at the details beginning to emerge. Alleged private conversations. Quiet, concealed exchanges. Patterns of contact investigators are now trying to reconstruct piece by piece. And when those fragments are placed together, they don't feel random. They feel deliberate, coordinated. That's where the weight intensifies because this is no longer just about actions. It's about relationships, influence, and the possibility of unseen forces shaping everything behind the scenes. Step back, and a much larger picture starts to take form. If more than one person could be involved, then the questions don't stay confined. They expand outward. How much was known before this? What leads were ignored or never followed? And why are these details only surfacing now? One reaction online captured that tension perfectly. If he's pointing beyond himself, then the version we were given was never complete. And now the escalation becomes impossible to ignore. The attention sharpens. The speculation spreads. Pressure builds from every direction because this case is no longer just about what happened. It's about what might still be hidden beneath everything. And that brings it all to one unavoidable question. Is this the moment the truth is finally revealing itself in full? Or the moment the story becomes too complex to contain? This is where everything shifts again, where it stops resembling a simple case and starts looking like something that was never meant to stay buried. A situation that once seemed controlled is now expanding into territory no one anticipated. And at the center of that expansion is Joe McCann, whose alleged claims have completely changed the weight of this narrative. What once looked like an ending is now being re-examined as a beginning. New angles are surfacing. New claims are gaining traction. And there's a growing sense that the original version of events was never complete. But this is where it becomes impossible to look away, because what's unfolding now isn't just about what happened. It's about who else might be connected. Allegations pointing toward coordination instead of isolation. Subtle signals now point toward a familiar figure lingering quietly behind the scenes. Communication trails are being pulled apart piece by piece as investigators work to uncover what may have been hidden in plain sight. And if even a fraction of those links prove real, then this case stretches far beyond a single name. The emotional weight shifts instantly because this is no longer just about uncovering facts. It's about facing how much may have been concealed from the very beginning. A family already burdened with loss is now confronting something heavier. The possibility that the truth was never as simple as it appeared. Look again at the timeline. In the early stages, everything moved quickly. A conclusion formed. A direction was accepted. And then silence. No major updates. No deeper revelations. No urgency pushing the case forward. For a time, it felt like the story had reached its endpoint, like the final chapter had already been sealed. But now, that silence carries a different meaning, because suddenly new claims emerge. And they are shaking the foundation of everything people thought they understood. That kind of shift is impossible to ignore. When a case expands after it was believed to be finished, it usually points to one thing. Something was never fully understood the first time. And that's where a deeper theory begins to take shape. Was there always another layer hidden beneath everything, waiting for the right moment to surface? Or is this a dramatic shift unfolding under pressure? Because once multiple connections, no matter how distant, begin entering the narrative, the entire structure starts to change. What once looked clear becomes uncertain. What once felt resolved becomes unstable. Now look at the details being discussed. Alleged private exchanges. Encrypted communications. Contact patterns now reportedly being examined for timing and consistency. And when those elements begin to align, the feeling shifts completely. It no longer seems scattered or coincidental. It begins to feel intentional, coordinated. That's where the tone of this entire situation grows heavier, because this is no longer just about isolated actions. It's about relationships, influence, and control. And the moment influence enters a story like this, it introduces an entirely new level of concern. The question is no longer only about what happened. It becomes about what may have been kept from surfacing earlier. One reaction spreading online captures that rising tension with unsettling clarity. If more than one person was involved, then the truth we were given was never complete. And now the escalation is impossible to dismiss. The attention is intensifying. The speculation is accelerating. Pressure is rising from every direction because the public is no longer just watching. They're analyzing every detail, every delay, every silence, every unexplained shift in narrative. And the deeper this goes, the harder it becomes to separate what was known from what may have been deliberately kept hidden. Because at this point, this is no longer just about solving a case. It's about understanding how the story itself was shaped, why certain angles were pushed forward, and why others never surfaced at all. And if these alleged developments lead where many believe they might, then this case doesn't just grow, it transforms. What once appeared to be a single path now reveals itself as layered, pressured, and far more complex than anyone first imagined, bringing everything to its most critical turning point. Because now the focus is no longer fixed on the past. It's locked onto what comes next. Will investigators fully pursue these emerging leads? Will the connections now being discussed survive real scrutiny? Or will this become another chapter of unanswered questions, where the deeper truth slips further away, just as it seems closest to being revealed? Or does this spiral into something we've witnessed before, where the questions keep multiplying, but the answers remain just beyond reach? The weight rises one last time. A family still searching for certainty. A public still tracking every shift. And a story that refuses to settle into anything solid. Because at this point, it's no longer just about what happened. It's about whether the full truth was ever meant to surface at all. And that brings us to the one question no one can ignore anymore. Is this the moment everything finally comes into focus, or the moment the narrative becomes so tangled it can never be fully uncovered? This is where control begins to slip, where the story stops being contained and starts drifting into something unpredictable. What once appeared to be a single, clear sequence is now cracking under pressure.